Okay, hello Ling statisticians. In this video, I just want to walk you through the basics of the first homework exercise. It's not super complicated in terms of like how much thought you have to put into it. It's just something you have to do. Through this exercise, we want to basically create data for ourselves so we can play around with when we're analyzing data in R as we walk through the rest of the class. So what we're going to do here is we're going to get some voice onset time measures. And if you've taken my phonetics class, you hopefully remember what voice onset time is. And if you haven't, I'm going to walk you through how to calculate it at the end of this video. But first, I'll tell you what you have to do for the exercise. So this is due on Friday of this week. I know it's the first week of classes and we've got, lots of stuff on our mind, but it's not that complicated to do this. You just got to sit down and do it. And what you need to do is record yourself saying three repetitions of the list of words below, and then measure the voice onset time of the initial stop in each repetition of each word. So we've got 15 words down here at the bottom of the exercise. 5 of them start with the sound P, and 5 start with a T, 5 start with a K sound. They're all stop sounds at the beginning, and they have different vowels right after them, and then an L at the tail end. So peel, pale, paw, pull, pool, so on and so forth. The others sound just the same. They just have different stops at the beginning. And what we want to do is measure the VOT of these stops, either the P, the T, or the K. And so once you measure your VOT for these individual stops, I want you to write down those measures in milliseconds to within 1 decimal point of precision. I'll show you how to do that in case you're not sure. And then once you've written those down, like in an Excel spreadsheet or something like that, upload those to the Homework 1 Dropbox on D2L. Okay, so again, the point is you're going to read each of these words 3 times. And the reason I want you to read them 3 times is because your VOT measures they'll probably vary a little bit from one repetition to the next. There'll be some variation we can expect from, say, different vowel contexts or different stop types at the beginning of the word, but there's also a little bit of variation you can expect from just one repetition to the next. So I want to be able to capture that and put it all together in one big batch of data, and then we'll play around with it in meaningful ways starting next week. All right, so as I mentioned, for those of you who don't know how to measure the VOT of a stop, I'm going to show you how to do that here in a second. Before I do that, I'll just wrap up sort of the logistics of this exercise. I want you to send me your measures, remember VOT in milliseconds, and then also I want you to send me your recordings you make for this exercise, your sound recordings. I'm going to show you how to make sound recordings using Prot. That's the nicest way to make them for my perspective, because then I can play around with those recordings as well. In Prot, you can record things in what we call lossless format, like WAV files or AIFF files, that sort of thing. Those are the easiest to process for me because I'm going to be playing around with your sound files a little bit as well to get more data out of them that we aren't going to address explicitly in this exercise. Give me a second. So I'll show you how to do that, and I'll show you how to make the measurements, and I think that's pretty much it. There's also a little note here about how we're going to work with the numbers you provide for this exercise in the next homework, which will be due next week. Okay, so with no further ado, we can get into the meat of this exercise so you can get started. I've loaded up the Prot website here. It can be found at this web link here. You can get there in a slightly simpler way by going to prot.org, Praat.org. Prot is a Dutch word which means speak, and it's created by these Dutch phoneticians who put it out there for free. Thank you very much, Paul and David. You've changed the world of phonetics by making this available and easy to use, or relatively easy to use. And it can do a lot of different things, including what we want to do for this exercise. So I've got it loaded up here. Its icon it looks like a mouth and an ear. I think these guys maybe are a little better at phonetics than they are at art. But be that as it may, when you open it up, it gives you these 2 windows, an object window and a picture window. You don't need the picture window like basically ever. So close that up, and you can just look at the objects window. So again, if you've taken my phonetics class, this is something we've done a lot of in that class. So you can kind of stop watching now. If you haven't, though, if you want to make a recording, let's say we want to record just these 5 words here. The way you do that is you go to New and Record Mono Sound. And it's going to be able to record you speaking through the microphone on your computer. Some people get tempted to be all sophisticated and fancy and record a stereo sound. That's not going to help you in really any meaningful way if you're just recording through your computer. To record stereo in some, artistic way, you need two microphones that are placed in different spots so you can kind of get a different perspective on the sound. And if you record stereo, you probably don't have that set up to begin with, but if you record stereo without it, all it's going to do is make your sound files twice as big as they need to be without adding any information. So please don't do that. Just record mono sound, and you get this little interface here. Again, it gives you this kind of choice between mono and stereo, so on and so forth. Don't mess with any of these default settings. It should be okay. The only reason you should mess with them is if you're not able to record any sound at all. And you should be able to see if you're recording anything by hitting this record button, and then you can see this sort of column representation bounce up and down. That's just representing how much sound is going into the microphone as I'm speaking, right? So if I say something really loud, you might see this bounce up from green to yellow to red, like, ha! Like that. Yeah, if you hit the red, you're speaking too loudly, so don't go there, basically. Try to keep it in the green, and that should record at a level that the computer can process with no difficulty. I'm not actually going to save any of this, so I'm going to just say stop. And none of that will get saved unless I hit this Save to List button, but I don't want to save what I was just like rambling through there. Instead, I'm going to read these 5 words in this order, just one repetition for now. And then I'm going to show you how to record VOT or measure VOT from these stops. So I'm just going to read these 5, hit record. Peel, pale, pawl, pull, pool. Then I hit stop. And then what I can do, I can just say save the list. I'll show you how this works. If I say save the list and click on this blue highlighted button here, it'll pop open a sound here in the objects window called Untitled. If I want to have a name that's more informative than that, I can change the name here. I'm just going to change it to PS for the P's in this particular recording, and I'll save that to list. And it's going to wind up being the exact same file, but a different name. That's all you need to do to get it in this object window. And the object window is where we can start to play around with it. So number 1, if I want to save that recording, I go to the save option. And I want you to use either Wave or AIFF, please. Actually, yeah, probably just Wave is the easiest way to do this. I'll save it to my desktop, I guess, because I don't need to gum up some of my other files. So I'm going to save ps.wave to my desktop. You can save it wherever you need it to go. You just saw it appear here, maybe on top of the hard drive icon on my Mac. You can save it wherever it needs to go on your hard drive of your computer, as long as you're able to find it later and then, attach it in an email or send it to the Dropbox on D2L. That's how you save what you recorded. How you look at what you recorded is by clicking on this highlighted View and Edit button. And this shows me what I just said there a second ago. Turn up the volume a bit. So if you haven't used Prot before, this will all look new and unfamiliar. I'll just say this is what's called a waveform view up here of the recording, and this is called a spectrogram view. We're not going to talk about the details of these things in this class for stats. All I want you to do is just be able to make these VOT measurements. But to do that, you might want to listen to what you recorded. So to do that, you can click on either of these 2 sort of rows, if you want to say, or cells down here saying visible part or total duration. Peel, pale, pawl, pull, pool. Then I hit stop. Yeah, so just by clicking on either of these buttons, it's going to play the whole thing. You can grab a part of it. So hopefully it became clear that each one of these black smudges is an individual word in my recording. So let's grab the first black smudge and then click on the little cell underneath it. Peel. That's the word peel. Peel. So great, that's peel. This should be pale. Pale. So on and so forth all the way through. Paul. All you got to do is click on these little buttons to hear them. If you want to zoom in, though, which you will need to do for this exercise, you highlight that word, and then you go down here and you click on SEL, which I think means select. And there we go. Peel. That's peel. Peel. And now at this point, what I want to do is record the VOT measure for this particular stop at the beginning of this word. Okay, so what VOT is, again, it's helpful if you've taken my phonetics class. If you haven't, this is just a crash course. There's a little bit more involved in this, but the basics are, if you say a word like peel, what you're doing hopefully you can feel that you bring your two lips together, peel for the P at the very beginning. And then there's a vowel after that E, peel. That's the way we normally think of it. But in between the sort of opening of your lips for the P and the beginning of the E proper, in the middle of the word, there's a little puff of air that comes out of your mouth. If you put your hand in front of your mouth as you say oh, peel, you can feel that kind of that puff right after the P opens up, right after your lips open up. And that part is called aspiration. And what's going on there is that what you're going to do for your E, for your vowel here, and for the L at the end, is you're going to voice here at your vocal folds. You're going to bring your vocal folds together so that when you push air out of your lungs, the vocal folds open and close at a quite rapid rate. But before you bring them together, you leave them open as you're saying the P part. And for a brief amount of time while they're open, you're just going to pump air out of your lungs so that it doesn't make your vocal folds open and close. It just kind of rushes out and makes a noisy kind of sound, which is like an H. It sounds like this. Kind of has an E flavor to it because there's an E vowel right after it. But anyways, this is called aspiration, that bit right there. And when you are trying to measure VOT, which is called, it's a short way to say voice onset time, you're measuring how long does it take the voicing part of this word to begin after you release that stop, that P at the beginning of the word. So let's do this simply. We'll include what's called the release burst here. So this little spike is where your lips open up, that little part, and then this is the aspiration proper. I'll try to make it easy on you guys and just go from where you see the release burst starting until you get to this part of the waveform where you see these repetitions, these cycles start to begin, the little jagged edges popping up and down in a regular fashion. You can see the same thing on the spectrogram where you see these sort of consistent vertical lines or bars kind of shining through the smudginess here. That's harder to read if you're not used to looking at a spectrogram. It's easier if you kind of see these up and down kind of cyclic patterns here in the waveform. And what you should see for the aspiration is just this kind of dark randomness down here at the bottom, a dark smudge. That's your aspiration. And all I want you to do is measure the time here. So the time can be found in these little cells that we've been clicking to play the sound. So this is representing how long, what the duration of this portion of the utterance is in seconds. So it's 0.050663 seconds. And I said on the exercise here that I want you to measure this in milliseconds to within 1 decimal point of precision. So what that means is a millisecond is 1,000th of a second. So 0.050 seconds is 50 milliseconds. But I want you to carry it 1 point further than that and say this is 50.7 milliseconds, right? So round up 6 to 7 because there's a 6 right after it. So for that, we will say, why don't we do something like this? Word repetition, VOT. So my word is peel. It's the first repetition, and I've got 50.7 milliseconds for that. That's the way it would look like in an Excel spreadsheet if I just started recording it that way. For me, it's a convenient way to do it. You can do it whatever way you want to do it, as long as you get the information in there. These 3 bits of information, the word, which repetition it is, and the VOT. Let's do another one just so we're clear on how this process works. So after you select, you can go out to the whole thing by clicking on out, or maybe all gives you the whole thing. Out will just like zoom out a little bit like this, and you might not get to the whole thing. In zooms in. If we look at this is my production of pale. So hopefully you can see the same kind of landmarks here. This little bit is where my lips open. And then there's a little bit of aspiration right after it. And then the voicing for the vowel begins. because you can see this more consistent up-down pattern, which is acoustic reflection of how my vocal folds are opening and closing. They kind of create noise, a big spike in noise or big spike in sound, I guess you could say, every time they open and close. What I want is the not spike part of that sound, but the sort of random part that we get with this aspiration right there. So I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit more because I can't read how long that is because it's relatively short. So again, I'll include that release burst here, which is a bit of cheating. And then, you know, it's not always entirely clear where that first sort of cycle begins or ends. I can kind of see it beginning down here, and this kind of looks like the first dip in this whole thing. So I'll stop there, just grab this bit here. It doesn't have to be that super exact for this exercise, just give it your best shot. But at least at this point, I can read the time, which is 0.027495. That is going to be 27.5 milliseconds. I'll do one more just in case it's not totally clear, but hopefully you can at least see already that there's a bit of variation in how much VOT I'm getting. This one is actually a little bit easier. Paul. It's the Paul. Cast a Paul on the proceedings. So here's my little release burst for my P. You can hear my lips, maybe. And then this is the aspiration. This one's a lot clearer. You can see that noisy smudge here before, maybe it looks like a caterpillar or something, a fuzzy caterpillar. Anyways, before the cyclical part begins for the periodic voicing. That's my aspiration. I'll include the release burst though, just keep it consistent. So we'll go from here to here. And this says 0.050830. So I've got 50.8. Yeah, so a little bit of variation here, and that's kind of what we're interested in looking at for now. Just make those recordings, save them, look at the recordings and get VOT measures from them. Send me your recordings and send me your VOT measures in some convenient format like Excel or whatever, some tabular format. And that's all you got to do for this exercise. If you simply just do it, you get an A for the exercise. I'm not going to grade you beyond that. And if you don't know how to do VOT or have a question about how to measure it, feel free to check into office hours or send me an email before Friday because I want to make sure that that is not going to trip you up on this exercise. Just want you to get the data more than anything else. Okay, I think that covers it. I'm not going to say anything further, but I will say more about how to play around with these measures in a statistical sense when we do homework number 2 next week. So that's it for now. All right, I know I said I was done with that video, but there's one other thing I need to mention, which is that if you say one of the sounds at the beginning of these words as their voiced counterpart, so instead of peel, you say Beale, whatever that means, like Beale Street in Memphis, I guess. I don't know. Anyways, your VOT might look a little bit funny, so in case you wind up with this sort of situation, I'll just show you how to measure it. So I'll just read this first list of 5 as a set of B's again, or newly again. Anyways, Beale, Bale, Ball, Bowl, Bool. Yeah, and so we can come up with meanings for the words there that are not words, and we'll call that B's or BS, I guess. Just having fun all the way down here. So again, just open it up the same way we did before, and then highlight it here. And you'll see this, so this might apply to you. So before we had this little bit of aspiration here, but we're not really getting that. We're just going straight from like the beginning of the word to the voicing and the vowel right after it. Beale, that's the difference between a B and a P acoustically. So yeah, if you're going to measure VOT here, you got a very short amount of time basically to measure VOT. So you're really going to have to zoom in on this. Like I said before, you can include that sort of release burst, the popping open of the lips as part of your VOT, but right after that, the voicing basically begins, like say there. So zoom in really close, and then you get something like 10 milliseconds, maybe, for Beale. Yeah, so you're not actually going to say B's, but some people produce their P's and T's and K's with relatively short VOT, so you might not be able to see the aspiration there clearly. And if that applies to you, just zoom in as close as you need to and then get your measurement that way. There's also a possibility that you might get voicing before the release of the B, like Beale, Bale, Ball, Bowl, Bool. So we'll call that BS2 because it kind of adds more BS to it in terms of how you will actually measure the VOT here. So I kind of made these nasals, but here's a little bit of what we call pre-voicing, or yeah, a little bit of an M. But anyways, what you do here is that if it's voicing before that popping open of the lips, then you just measure negative VOT. So you start from here and you go to there and you say, well, that's 70.1 milliseconds before I released it. So you measure that as a negative. We'll just call it, say BL2. Got repetition right there, right? Yeah, so that's what happens if the voicing starts before you release the stop. If the voicing starts after you release the stop, and you get positive VOT. And the last thing I'll say is that I'm recording. If you haven't done any recordings like this before, I'm recording in a relatively quiet room. It's not like a perfectly sound dampened room or anything like that. But nobody else is speaking in here. There's I have a TV in the corner, but it's not on, that sort of thing. Just keep things quiet. Like the more noisy an environment you record in, the harder it's going to be to do this exercise. If there are people talking, or if you're in like a hallway that has echoes and stuff, it's going to make your life harder. So try to avoid that sort of situation and just keep it silent around you, and you should be fine. You can usually read these cues pretty well, even in a non-ideal environment, but it has to be relatively quiet. Okay, I think I've said enough. Have fun with the exercise. I'll see you again in a few minutes or a few days, I guess, for exercise number 2.